Hey everyone, welcome to part 3 of the Interactive Brokers Web API tutorial. In part 1, I showed you how to use Docker in order to containerize the client portal gateway, as well as package up all of the dependencies necessary to authenticate against the API so that we could write part 2, which was a Python script that requests endpoints in this API so that you can do things like retrieve account information, retrieve order history, get data about specific contracts, market data history for any one of these contracts, for example, Google stock. And I also showed you how to programmatically submit orders. Now, with those foundations in place, we can start building bigger and better things. For instance, this Python web application that I'm going to walk through in this video. So this web application features a number of screens. The first screen is the dashboard that shows you information about your account, including your cash balance. We're going to show you how to build a portfolio screen that monitors all of your positions and profit and loss. You're able to drill down to a specific stock position, as well as fetch market history. You're able to programmatically place a buy or sell order. You can look up a particular stock. For instance, let's say I type Palantir and want to find the contract ID. I also have a screen where you can see all the orders you have in place. Finally, I'll show you the stock scanner functionality that allows you to scan the market, whether that's stocks, ETFs, futures, indices, Asian stocks, so forth, many different types of instruments. I can scan based on any particular filter here. And so if I want to find a stock with a price below 10, let's say I want these small stocks that had big gains, I can scan here. You can see BNRG, whatever this stock is, had a gain of 140%. And depending on how you trade, you might want to just focus on large cap stocks. Some people want to focus on small cap stocks that had a huge percentage gain. We're not going to talk about trading strategy in this video. This is just an infrastructure video, so no investment advice here. And so all this code is available and open source in the link below, the Interactive Brokers Web API under my GitHub account, all available for free. Please take it and make it your own. And if you like what I do here and want to support the weeks I spend in research and coding to create these and give them away, I do have an Interactive Brokers link below that you can visit if you decide to check them out and open an account that supports the channel. So let's go ahead and get started with the tutorial. So if you've been following thus far, you should already have the Git repository checked out. You should have a scripts directory, a web app directory, and a Docker container up and running, and you should be authenticated. If not, revisit my previous 2 videos where I showed how to set this up. This video is just focused on the web application walkthrough. The web app is under this folder called web app, and most of the code is in this app.py, the logic for it. And then the presentation of this code is under templates. And so there's various HTML files here, Jinja 2 templates they're called, that present the HTML, the styles, the JavaScript for the web. And so it's backed by a Python web application here, and I'll walk you through this code. All right, so let's walk through the Python web application. So if you watched the previous videos, you know that we have this Docker file, and we brought up this container and installed the client web portal API, and it ran at the end, it runs this start shell script, and we expose port 5056 where our Python web application is running. If you look in the start shell script, you'll see that we create this web application directory, and we change into that directory, and then we create a virtual environment. We activate that virtual environment, and we install the dependencies. In the case of this application, it just requires Flask, the web application framework, and requests, which we use to make HTTP requests to the Interactive Brokers web API. And after those dependencies are installed, our shell script runs the Flask application on port 5056, and I run it in debug mode. So that way, every time I modify the source code here, it'll automatically refresh the web page. I don't need to like rebuild the container or anything like that. So if I go to my command line here, you'll see that I'm already logging out all the output when I make requests to my web application. So let's walk through how these endpoints work. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the dashboard page, right? And you see there's no specific endpoint in here. This is just slash, right? And so the slash endpoint is here. So this is the dashboard. And so how Flask works is you have these little function decorators. And so the slash endpoint, the base endpoint, just calls this function called dashboard. So all of the logic for this base endpoint is defined under this dashboard function. And so what does the dashboard function do? All it needs to do is make a request to the Interactive Brokers API to get my account details. And so I'm getting the account details by making a get request to /portfolio/accounts. And if you look in the API documentation here under endpoints, you'll see there's a bunch of endpoints that are defined for my account. Now, there's also a client web portal API v1 that's here. This documentation is deprecated, but sometimes I find that some of this documentation, some of it's better on the old documentation, even though this is the new documentation. So sometimes I'll refer to this. So here on this one, you see I have /portfolio/accounts, and I kind of like the documentation here because it shows the full request and the full response, and it has this little this nice browser right here. So some of the things are more well documented on this page, and some of them are more up to date on the new documentation. So that's why a couple of times I think I've mixed up which API I'm calling. And so I'm calling /portfolio/accounts here, and then I'm getting that response that's in JSON format and storing it in under accounts in this variable. Now, if that request fails, I display make sure you authenticate first when you visit this page, and I'll redirect the user to redirect you to the Interactive Brokers login screen. And then once you log in, then it'll be authenticated, right? And so that fetches the account data, and then I just get the first account in the list, just like I did in the last video. And then after that, I can fetch the account summary and get some details there. And so all this data I can pass. So this is all the logic behind my web endpoint, and then I need to display that data. So I'm gathering all the data on the back end, and then I'm sending that data to the front end so that we can display it in this nice table format that's on the web app right here. And so that data gets passed over, and then I render my template, and my template is called dashboard. And so you see, I just display this data in this table. So I use an HTML table, and then I display everything under account currency, account type, account business type, and then an account summary. And so I'm displaying the total cash value of my account summary, and then I'm rounding it to 2 decimal places. And so you see, these are my top level account details, and then my summary response contains this total cash value, and I'll have a bunch of decimals, and then I use this round to 2 decimal places to display it right here. And so all this is you hit the endpoint, it calls the function, we make a couple requests, then we render a template called dashboard. You'll also see that it extends layout.html, and so in Flask, if you haven't watched my previous videos, you see that all of these different screens have this common header here with the menu and the title and so forth. And so in this overall layout, this is some shared code. And so the overall layout, I include Bootstrap, which is a CSS library to make it look a little bit nicer than vanilla HTML. So I include the title here and then an overall nav bar. And then for the stuff that changes between pages, I just put them in this block called content, and then that little bit is all that changes. And so this header is always the same, and then this bit of the content changes. And so in dashboard, you'll see that I extend the layout.html. So that means use this overall layout application shell, and then whatever's in content here, whatever's in content in dashboard, so in block content, all this stuff goes in the overall layout right there. And so you'll see if I go to another screen, portfolio, for instance, you'll see I follow the same pattern where I have extends layout.html, I have a content block, and then the only thing that changes my positions, and so I put a header at positions, and I have another table where I loop through my positions. So how does this work? You see the /portfolio is in the URL, and so in Flask, if I go to app.py, you'll see I have a route called /portfolio .route/portfolio right there, and all the logic that's required for displaying this page is defined under this portfolio function. So /portfolio, well, what it does, it makes a request to the Interactive Brokers portfolio endpoint. It passes my account ID, and then it gets all of my positions. And then I just pass those positions over to my portfolio HTML, and I pass the data just like this as a keyword argument. And then if you go and do portfolio.html, I just loop through the list for item and positions in my Jinja 2 template. and then I loop over it row by row. And then I link to each of those contracts. So you see I have a link here, and I link by contract ID. So I have a /contract/ the item's contract ID. And by default, I'm doing a 365-day market history. And so you see how I'm just displaying each of the attributes, the company name, the symbol, and the contract ID, average cost, current price, and so forth. And so you see I'm just looping over this list of items that comes back from the API and displaying them in a table. Now, when I click on one of these, you see it links to /contract and then a contract ID and then the number of days to get. And so if you look in my app here, I have another route. It's called, you guessed it, /contract right here. And then each of these becomes a variable. So I can have variables in my URL routes here. And so this 208 for Google, this gets passed into contract ID as a function argument. And then the period of 365 days comes in here as well. And then these are just parameters to the Interactive Brokers Web API. And so I put my contract ID in here, just like I did in the last video. We did this from the command line, but this time we're just getting the parameters, not from variables, but from what's defined in the URL route right here. So the contract ID and period comes in here, and then we pass the contract ID in this data dictionary here. We request the details of the security using the endpoint we did in the last video. And then we request the market history just like we did in the last video. And so all that comes from the URL. We wrap it around. We're just basically just wrapping these Interactive Brokers REST API functions with a Flask route and then defining some logic in there and then just massaging this data and presenting it in a way that's user-friendly instead of just a command line, right? And then I render a template after I get my price history, pass the data I need, and then we have this clean separation of the logic that is requesting the data and the presentation layer, which is what displays details about the contract. And so if you look at my contract here, we're displaying the contract name, which is Alphabet. We're displaying the sector, communications, the exchange, NASDAQ, and then we're displaying a chart. Now for the chart functionality here, I'm just borrowing these images from FinViz, but I can dynamically generate them because if you inspect the source there, so if you go to something like FinViz, if you do a right click and you do inspect right here, you can see they actually generate these images, charts 2-node, and then they have a little symbol in here. And what you'll find is they follow a common pattern. And so I can pass the contract ticker in here and just use an image tag, and it'll dynamically load this chart image right here. And so that's how I'm doing the charts. If you want something more advanced, I've made lightweight videos on lightweight charts and trading view charts in my other videos, and I'm not spending quite as much time on charts on this one because I like these FinViz ones. Are nice little static images that we can just use a shortcut to place them here to visualize this stuff. And at the bottom we have the price history, and so we just call the price history endpoint, and then you can see down here I just loop through the price history data right here and display the timestamp, and I format the timestamp, and then I display open, high, low, close, and volume just like that. And you could take this data and plot it with Plotly if you wanted to. That's another way you could display this chart, or you could use MPL Finance, which is another one good library for displaying trading view charts. Now, the other thing you'll notice here is I have this little form for placing an order. And so I could place an order for 5 shares of Google stock at, let's say, $30 a share and click place limit order right there. And you'll see that'll actually create an order and place it in the queue. Market's closed right now, so that won't fill. But how does this work? You'll see in my contract.html here, I just have a form here, and that just submits to an endpoint that's at /order. So I post all of the data from this form. And so what I do is post all of the required information required for the Interactive Brokers API. So I either post a value of buy or sell, I post a quantity, a price, the contract ID that's currently on the screen. So I was looking at Google, but if I was on the Taiwan Semiconductor page, I would post the contract ID for Taiwan Semiconductor, and then I'm submitting that. Now, when I submit that, it submits to an endpoint called /order. And so if you look in my routes here in my app.py, you'll see that I have an order endpoint that accepts a post request. And this is just a function called place order. And now what I do here is parse all of the post variables that come from the form. And so since I posted a contract ID, a price, and a quantity, I get the ones that the user posts in the form, and then I plug those right into the data dictionary that I have here. So this matches up closely with our command line script and REST API's example. We had this thing where we built manually a data dictionary, so a payload to send to the orders endpoint. And so what I did, instead of filling them in, hard coding 20 in here, what this does is it comes from the form post, and this is just place a limit order based on what's in the form post. And so it builds this data dictionary, and then it can just post for my account ID and place the order. And then it redirects. So I return a redirect to /orders. So that's why as soon as I place this order, so let's say I want 5 shares of Taiwan Semiconductor. Once it succeeds, it redirects me automatically to /orders here, which brings me to the next endpoint, which is /orders. So if I do /orders right here, route /orders, right? You see I have my orders endpoint. This calls the orders endpoint that gets all the orders under my account, passes it to the orders.html template, and you see I have a table with the order ID, ticker, description, company. And again, I loop through all the data that comes back and display it in a table. Next to each order, I also have a cancel button. So if this order has not been filled, you can cancel it. And if I hover over that button, you see that in the bottom left-hand corner of my browser, it has an order ID /cancel. And there's another endpoint in the app.py. If I type /cancel here, you see for this route, what I do is call the API, and this sends a delete request with a cancellation URL. So that's iServer/account/account ID /order/order ID, and then you can see the delete request. And so if I go here, and I should be able to see, yeah, so cancel order here. You see this one is request.delete, and then that's the structure of a delete request /account/account ID /order/order ID. And so I just pass that to cancel order right there. Now the final bit of functionality is most complicated. There's this scanner feature right here. So by default, I do a scan for US stocks that are priced above 20, ordered by percent gain. So how does this work? Well, there's endpoints for scanners. And so if I type scanners in my API documentation here, you'll see there is a scanners section or scanner section right there. And there's a whole lot of scanner parameters. And so if I go to /iServer/scanner/params like that and get that, make a GET request, I should see tons of parameters. And so I'm going to do this bit in the browser just to show you what that looks like. And so I'm going to go https://localhost 5055/v1/API, just like that. And I am going to cut out that bit. And look at that. We have tons of scanner parameters. And so under scan type list, you have this big list of all the different parameters you can scan by. So you'll see I have a drop down of sort by, and so all these are the top. So top percent gainers, top percent losers, most active, and so forth. And nested under each of these, there's the instruments it supports. Now, not every instrument is supported by, not all of these parameters apply to every instrument type. And so you'll see whenever I switch over to equity ETFs, you might see some of these values change. Or if I go to, let's say, US futures here, you'll notice that the locations change here to CME. But if I go to US stocks, it'll be listed NASDAQ and so forth. And so these different parameters will be different depending on which instruments support them, right? And so if I go back here, you'll see the scan type list there, but there's also something called an instrument list. And this gives me the text to display like US stocks and then all the filters that are supported. So for US stocks, there's tons of filters that I can do, which each of them allow you to specify a value. And so I might want to filter by average volume, MACD signal, what else do we have here? Trade count, tons and tons of things depending on what you like to look at. social sentiment score, etc. And so I build basically for all of these, I dynamically build drop downs. And so when you make this scanner parameters request, you see how there's all of this data. What I've done is massage all of this data and gather it into a large data dictionary that I can present in the UI in a friendly way. And so if I go to my scanner endpoint here, you'll see I request all those scanner parameters, and then I build these big maps here. And so I loop through the instrument list, the filter list, and the scan type list, and build this big data dictionary that I use to dynamically build all of these selects here. So if you view the source of the HTML here, you'll see the filter map, I believe I called it. And you'll see in JavaScript, I have a scanner map and filter map. And what these allow me to do, they allow me to easily look things up. And so if the currently selected select box option is stocks, then I know all the filters that are available that I can display. And so when I select stocks, I know I can display these filters. So I can display stocks that gapped some percent above, top percent gainers, and then that gives me this gapper list here. And so I'm scanning for stocks that gapped above 10%, and let's make that even higher, 50%. And then I'm going to sort by the top percentage gainers. So this should give me a list of stocks that gapped up a huge amount. So yeah, see that gapped up 60% right there. And then I could also find, let's say, gap below and see stocks that gained a gap down. And so I'm going to do a gap scanner there. Some of these are really small cap stocks, so they don't have a FinVis chart. But you see like this, whatever this is, gap down by 56% there. And so these are stocks that are, they may, I don't know if they're going to go bankrupt or what, but that's like a penny stock. And so forth. This stock gapped up, then gapped way down the most recent trading day. So those are your falling knife scan, and there's tons of cool stuff you could probably do with this. And I'm not going to run them all here, but you can test those out and play around with them. And so, so once I build this dictionary list, what I do here is when they submit the form, so you'll notice if I go back to my scanner, if I were to submit top percent losers there, you'll see the URL changes, and then I have the state of these drop downs in here. And so in the URL, I have instrument type stock, the major US stocks, price above, filter value of 20, top percent losers, and that the form was submitted. And what this does is gives me a URL. And so this lets me actually bookmark that URL or share it with someone else or get back to it later if I have like a favorite scan. And so now that I go back here, you see it pulls this back up. And so you'll see Elastic here, which was a pretty hot stock at some point, has gapped down pretty dramatically. I think that was an earnings call that just happened, and it went down 26% there. And so so you can bookmark those scans. And then so if you look at the endpoint here, I check if submitted is in the URL. So if submitted, then I can take my selected filters and build that payload the same way it's described here. So if you look here for iServer scanner run, I'm building dynamically this payload based on what's submitted in the form, right? And so I submit those in the form. I grab those from the URL. I build this payload of what type of instrument I'm scanning for, the location, what to sort by, a filter code, and a filter value. And then I post to this scanner run endpoint, and then I pass the scan results back to my scanner. And then you'll see in here, we should have a table where I loop through the scan results. And so I loop through all the scan results, and then you can see the company name and the embedded chart. And then I go here, you'll see the company name, Elastic, and embedded chart. And for each result in the scan that comes back from the API, I place a chart, and then I give a link if I want to drill down and see more about that stock, and if I want to buy or sell it, or whatever options you want to give on the stock detail page. So yeah, I know that was kind of quick and a quick walkthrough, but I also don't want to, I used to make these 2-hour-long videos where I typed every bit of code, but that takes a little bit too long. So I just want to walk through my thought process on how to create this web application and just share the code with you, because some people just want to run this stuff and get hands-on and play around with it. And so, yeah, that's it for this series. We've gone through from containerizing the Interactive Brokers Web API and Client Portal Gateway to creating a command line script that calls the different API endpoints that are defined in the documentation, and went through how to create an actual web application with various URLs, forms, filters, lookups, and so forth, and how to wrap all of those API endpoints into a little one file, Flask app.py, call the API, and pass all of the data to a presentation layer in the form of HTML files, and render them onto a web application. And with just a simple Docker compose up, since we have this containerized, we can bring this up and have this nice web application that we can use, and you can make this your own and extend upon it. That's it for this tutorial series. I hope you've learned something about the Interactive Brokers Web API. Let me know if there's anything you would like to see, and I'll see if I can add on to this. Maybe I will maintain this and make this a more sophisticated package for people to build on. Thanks a lot for watching. As always, see you in the next one. Bye.